Virgo, welcome back, my beautiful souls. If you're new here, I'm so happy you're here. As always, this is a general reading, so take what resonates and leave what doesn't. Before we dive in, I just want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for your energy, your time, and your trust. It truly means more than you know. Okay, Virgo, the energy coming through already feels incredibly deep. I'm picking up on someone who has been trying to think their way out of their feelings for a very long time. Someone who kept choosing logic, kept convincing themselves that what they felt wasn't real. But something is changing, because the more they try to move away from this connection, the more their heart keeps leading them right back to you. So let's see what's unfolding here, Virgo. Let's see what the cards want to reveal. Virgo, the first thing that catches my attention is that this person is no longer running from the questions they've been avoiding. For a long time, they convinced themselves that they had everything figured out. They believed their decisions made sense. They believed they were being practical, responsible, rational. But lately, something has been disrupting that certainty. It's almost like they're sitting alone with their own thoughts and suddenly realizing that some of the things they once felt so confident about no longer feel true. And honestly, I think a big part of that realization has to do with you. Because I'm looking at the Hermit card here, and this energy feels very personal, very quiet, very private. This doesn't feel like someone talking to friends about you. This feels like someone having conversations with themselves. The kind of conversations that happen when nobody else is around. The kind that are impossible to escape. You know, I keep hearing the words, maybe they were right, and I don't think they expected to think that. I don't think they expected to look back at old conversations, old memories, old moments between the two of you, and suddenly see them differently. Because Virgo, this person misunderstood you, not completely, but enough. Enough to create distance. Enough to dismiss things they should have paid attention to. I feel like there were moments when you tried to guide them. Moments when you tried to help them see something. Moments when you pointed out patterns they weren't ready to acknowledge. And at the time, they may have viewed your words as criticism. They may have felt judged. They may have felt like you were being too analytical, too observant, too hard on them. But what's interesting is, they're beginning to realize that you weren't trying to control them. You weren't trying to change them. You simply saw things they weren't ready to see themselves. And Virgo, that realization is hitting harder than they expected, because the Ace of Swords card appears and the energy shifts immediately. It's almost uncomfortable, like a truth that can no longer be ignored. Like waking up from a dream and suddenly understanding what was right in front of you the whole time. I have to be honest. I don't think this person is angry. I don't think they're defensive anymore. If anything, they seem humbled. Because the more clarity they gain, the more they realize that your intentions were never selfish. You cared. You genuinely cared. Even during moments when they questioned you. Even during moments when they pushed back. Even during moments when they created distance. And that's something they can't stop thinking about. The High Priestess card is sitting here quietly in the spread, and there's something almost haunting about it. Because I feel like there were things you understood long before they did. Not because you're perfect. Not because you knew everything. But because your intuition picked up on things they kept trying to explain away. Virgo, I think this person spent a very long time trying to find logical explanations for feelings that didn't fit inside a logical box. And the harder they tried, the more complicated everything became. Because feelings don't always follow rules. Love doesn't always follow a plan. And that's exactly where they're finding themselves right now. Somewhere between what makes sense and what feels true. Okay? This is interesting. Because the Judgment card suddenly comes forward and the energy becomes impossible to ignore. This feels like an awakening. Not a dramatic awakening. Not somebody standing on a rooftop declaring their love. No. This feels much deeper than that. This feels like somebody finally being honest with themselves. And sometimes that's the hardest thing a person can do. They're starting to connect the dots. They're starting to understand why certain memories refuse to leave them alone. Why your words keep replaying in their mind. Why every attempt to move forward somehow circles back to you. And I think that's what scares them. Not because they don't care, but because they care more than they're comfortable admitting. You know, the strange thing about awakenings is that they rarely happen all at once. They happen in layers, one realization, then another, And I feel like that's exactly where this person is right now. They're peeling back layers of denial, layers of pride, layers of assumptions they once carried about you. And with every layer that falls away, they're seeing a different version of this connection, a version they weren't ready to see before. Because Virgo, the truth is beginning to catch up with them. And once certain truths are seen, They become very difficult to forget. What I'm sensing here is that they're standing at the edge of a realization that could change everything. They're not fully there yet, but they're getting closer, closer than they've ever been before. And the moment they finally stop fighting what their heart already knows, that's where this story begins to take a very different turn. Because what I'm seeing here, Virgo, is someone who can no longer place all the blame outside of themselves. For a long time, they had reasons. Reasons for staying busy, reasons for keeping their distance, reasons for putting certain conversations off until later. And honestly, some of those reasons probably sounded convincing even to them. But something is shifting. Because the deeper this person goes into their own reflection, the harder it becomes to avoid the role they played in all of this. The death card is sitting in front of me, and the energy feels surprisingly quiet, not dramatic, not chaotic, just heavy. Like someone standing in front of a mirror for longer than usual. Like someone looking at a version of themselves they don't recognize anymore. I keep feeling that this person has spent years building a life that looked successful from the outside. A life that made sense. A life that checked all the right boxes. Career goals, responsibilities, plans, achievements. Things they could measure, things they could control. But love? Love was different. Love asked for something they weren't comfortable giving. Vulnerability, trust, emotional exposure. And I think that scared them more than they ever admitted. Because when you grow accustomed to protecting yourself, letting someone truly see you can feel dangerous. What's coming through is that this person learned very early in life that emotions could become liabilities. That if you care too much, you can get hurt. If you trust too much, you can be disappointed. If you love too deeply, you can lose. So they adapted. They became strong, independent, self-reliant, the kind of person who always had a plan, the kind of person who rarely asked for help, the kind of person who could walk into a room and appear completely composed even when something inside was falling apart. And that's where the Nine of Swords card starts appearing. Because I don't think they've been sleeping very well lately. Not necessarily because of you alone, but because they're finally allowing themselves to feel things they've been suppressing for years. You know, there are moments in life when distractions stop working. Work stops working. Achievements stop working. Keeping busy stops working. And eventually you're left alone with your thoughts. That's what this feels like. Lates, long drives, quiet mornings. Moments where nobody is demanding anything from them. Moments where there is nowhere left to hide. I have to be honest. The person I'm looking at seems exhausted, not physically, emotionally, because maintaining emotional walls requires energy. Pretending not to care requires energy. Acting unaffected requires energy. And I think they're beginning to realize just how much energy they've spent running from things that actually mattered. The Four of Pentacles card keeps pulling my attention back. And what's interesting is that it doesn't feel like they're holding on to money. It feels like they're holding on to control, holding on to familiar patterns, holding on to an old version of themselves that no longer fits. You know when someone keeps wearing a jacket they've outgrown because it feels familiar? That's exactly what this energy reminds me of. They're holding on to beliefs that once protected them, beliefs that once helped them survive. But those same beliefs are becoming a prison, because every time they try to move forward, something inside keeps pulling them backward. Not toward another person, not toward another opportunity, toward the unresolved parts of themselves, toward the moments they wish they handled differently, toward words they wish they had said, toward feelings they wish they had acknowledged sooner. And Virgo, I think that's where you come into the picture. Not because you're forcing them to change, but because your presence exposed things they could no longer ignore. There was something about the way you cared, the way you remained consistent, the way you saw through their defenses. It challenged them. Not in a negative way. It challenged the story they had been telling themselves. The story that they didn't need anyone. The story that emotions were inconvenient. The story that relationships always complicated life. Because if those stories were true, why do they keep thinking about you? Why does your absence feel heavier than they expected? Why does every road seem to lead back to the same questions? The Five of Cups card enters the reading, and suddenly there's regret here, a lot of it. Not dramatic regret, not the kind someone posts online, the private kind, the kind nobody sees, the kind that lives inside a person's chest. I keep hearing someone say, I should have listened. Not because they think Virgo was perfect, not because they think every moment between you was flawless, but because they're realizing there was sincerity in places where they once saw criticism. There was care in places where they once saw pressure. There was love in places where they once saw expectations. And that realization is difficult. Because once someone understands that they misunderstood a situation, they also have to confront the consequences of those misunderstandings. Okay, this feels important because despite all this regret, I don't see someone giving up. I see someone learning, slowly, painfully, but genuinely. It's almost as if they're dismantling their own defenses one piece at a time. And every piece that falls away reveals another truth they've been avoiding. The person they're becoming looks very different from the person Virgo first met. Much more honest, much more self-aware, much less interested in pretending they have everything figured out. And the deeper they go into this process, the more one particular realization keeps following them. A realization that becomes impossible to ignore. Because the question they're starting to ask themselves isn't whether they care. The question is what they're willing to do about it. Because that's the crossroads I'm seeing here, Virgo. The energy doesn't feel confused anymore. It feels serious. Like someone standing in front of a door they've been avoiding for a very long time. And the strange thing is, the door was never locked. They were simply afraid of what would happen if they walked through it. Okay, the Two of Wands is coming through very strongly, and I keep feeling this image of someone looking toward a future they once refused to imagine. Not because they didn't want it, because they didn't trust it. There's a difference. This person has spent so much of their life relying on certainty, calculating risks, planning outcomes, making sure every move made sense before taking action. But what happens when the thing your heart wants most doesn't fit neatly into a plan? What happens when logic and emotion stop agreeing with each other? That's exactly where they are. And honestly, I think they're exhausted from fighting themselves. For so long, it was easier to keep everything suspended, easier to postpone decisions, easier to convince themselves that time would somehow solve everything. But time hasn't solved anything. If anything, time has made certain feelings stronger. The longer they tried to create distance, the more obvious the connection became. The longer they focused on other priorities, the more frequently their mind returned to you. And that's why this energy feels different. Because they're no longer asking themselves whether they feel something. They're asking themselves what kind of future they're willing to create. You know what's interesting? I don't feel recklessness here. I don't see someone rushing blindly toward love. I see someone finally allowing themselves to consider what happiness could actually look like. And for some reason, Virgo, every path they explore seems to include you. Not because they're forcing it, not because they're idealizing you. Because when they imagine peace, you appear. When they imagine emotional safety, you appear. When they imagine a life that feels meaningful, you appear again. The Two of Cups arrives so naturally into this reading that it almost feels like it was waiting patiently in the background the entire time. And the energy around it is incredibly soft, very genuine, very human. I keep sensing moments they've never fully admitted to anyone. Moments where they caught themselves smiling because of a memory. Moments where they reached for their phone. Moments where they wondered what you were doing. Moments where they wished things had unfolded differently. This person has been carrying far more emotion than they've shown, much more. And the more they stop resisting those feelings, the more they realize this connection wasn't some temporary chapter. It wasn't something they could simply outgrow. It became part of them. Okay, this feels important because the fear I'm picking up on isn't fear of commitment. Not anymore. The fear is loss. The fear is realizing what life might look like if they continue standing still. The fear is waking up one day and discovering that the opportunity they kept postponing is no longer there. I have to be honest. That realization is hitting them harder than expected. Because for the first time, they're seeing that doing nothing is also a choice. Avoiding a decision is still a decision. Remaining silent is still a decision. And every day that passes forces them to confront that truth a little more. The Ace of Wands suddenly lights up the reading and everything feels different. The energy becomes alive, urgent, not chaotic. Not impulsive, alive. Like a spark that has finally found oxygen. Like motivation returning after a long period of hesitation. Because this person is beginning to understand that clarity means very little without action. Understanding how they feel isn't enough anymore. Acknowledging the connection isn't enough anymore. Something inside them wants movement, wants progress, wants change. And I keep hearing the words, I can't keep living like this. Not because they're unhappy in every area of life. Because one area of life keeps calling for their attention. One area keeps asking them to be brave. One area keeps asking them to stop observing and start participating. And Virgo, that area is this connection. Temperance is sitting quietly beside all of this, and the atmosphere softens immediately. It's almost like the reading takes a deep breath. Because while there's movement here, there isn't panic. While there's urgency, there isn't desperation. This feels like someone slowly becoming aligned with themselves. Someone who spent years moving against the current finally deciding to stop fighting the river. What's coming through is acceptance. Acceptance that feelings don't disappear just because they're inconvenient. Acceptance that some people enter your life for a reason. Acceptance that certain connections leave fingerprints on your soul. And I think this person is beginning to make peace with that. They're beginning to make peace with you, not as an idea, not as a fantasy, as someone real, someone important, someone who matters. The more they sit with that truth, the harder it becomes to imagine continuing down the same road they've been traveling. Because every future they're trying to build is slowly leading them toward one unavoidable question. Not whether they love you, not whether this connection matters, but whether they're finally ready to choose it. Because I don't think silence is protecting them anymore, Virgo. I think silence is becoming heavier than the truth itself. And that's the energy I'm stepping into as I continue pulling these cards. There are emotions here that have been locked away for so long that even this person forgot how much they were carrying. But they can't ignore it anymore. They really can't. The King of Cups appears, and the first thing I feel is restraint, not a lack of feeling. The opposite. Someone who has been feeling everything. Someone who has been watching, observing, holding themselves together, trying to stay composed, trying to stay reasonable, trying to maintain control, and honestly, they've done a pretty good job of it, at least on the outside. Most people around them probably have no idea what's actually happening beneath the surface. Most people would assume they're fine, focused, moving forward, living their life. But what's coming through feels completely different, because when they're alone, Virgo, your energy finds them. Certain songs find them, certain places remind them of you, certain conversations bring your name into their mind without warning. And I don't think they expected that. I think they assumed enough time would eventually dilute what they felt. Instead, something else happened. The feeling matured, it deepened, it became harder to dismiss. The Six of Cups just moved into focus, and suddenly I'm seeing memories everywhere. Not painful memories, important ones. The kind that return unexpectedly, a laugh they still remember. A conversation that seemed ordinary at the time, but feels significant now. A moment where you looked at them in a way nobody else ever has. And what's interesting is, the memories that keep returning aren't grand gestures. They're simple things, small things. The kind of moments people only remember when they truly cared. I keep seeing this person replaying situations over and over in their mind, not because they're stuck in the past, because they're trying to understand it, trying to understand you, trying to understand themselves, trying to understand why certain moments never left them. And Virgo, I think one realization keeps surfacing. You were more important to them than they admitted. Much more important. You know, some people don't realize the value of a connection until they're forced to experience life without it. And that's exactly what this feels like. This person has spent enough time away from your energy to understand what was actually there. And I have to be honest, they're not liking what they're discovering, because every answer seems to lead back to the same place. Back to you. Back to unfinished conversations. Back to words that were never spoken. Back to feelings that remained trapped behind pride, fear, uncertainty, or whatever walls existed at the time. The Ace of Swords suddenly cuts through the reading, and everything becomes crystal clear. The atmosphere changes immediately, because this person is reaching a point where honesty becomes unavoidable. I keep hearing someone say, I need to tell them. Not, I want to tell them. I need to tell them. There's a difference. A need comes from somewhere deeper. A need comes from carrying something for too long. And what they've been carrying feels incredibly heavy. They want to explain themselves. They want to explain what was happening inside their head. They want to explain why certain actions didn't match their feelings. Why they pulled away when they wanted closeness. Why they became quiet when they had so much to say. Why they appeared distant when they were actually overwhelmed. That doesn't mean they're trying to excuse everything. It feels more like they're trying to be understood. Maybe for the first time. Honestly, I don't think they're expecting perfection from this conversation. I don't think they're expecting all wounds to disappear overnight. I don't think they're expecting some magical outcome. What they want is truth. Real truth. The kind that exists when two people finally stop hiding. And Virgo, I feel like they owe you that. Deep down, they know it. The Page of Cups enters the reading, and suddenly I see nervousness. A lot of it. Because despite all this emotional growth, despite all this reflection, despite all this clarity, they're still human. They're still vulnerable. They're still afraid of what happens once the words leave their mouth. Because what if you're different now? What if you've moved on? What if the version of you they remember no longer exists? Those fears are real, very real. But what's fascinating is that those fears no longer seem powerful enough to stop them. The desire to speak is becoming stronger than the desire to hide. The desire to reach out is becoming stronger than the desire to stay silent. And that changes everything, because once someone reaches that point, action becomes much more likely. You know what's interesting? I don't see this conversation arriving with drama. I don't see shouting. I don't see chaos. I see honesty, awkward honesty, emotional honesty. The kind of honesty that comes from someone finally lowering their guard. The kind of honesty that says, this is what I should have told you a long time ago. And Virgo, the closer this person gets to that moment, the more I feel their heart racing. Because they know something important is approaching. A conversation they've avoided. A truth they've delayed. A door then closed for far too long. And from what I'm seeing here, their hand is already reaching for the handle. Because something has changed inside this person, Virgo. Not overnight. Not in one dramatic moment. Not because someone forced them to. This feels like a series of realizations that slowly built upon one another until it reached a point where pretending became harder than telling the truth. And honestly, I think they're tired. Not tired of the connection. Tired of living a life that doesn't fully reflect what they actually want. The Emperor stands out immediately, and the energy feels completely different from where this story began. There's a steadiness here, a maturity, a willingness to take responsibility. Because for a long time, I think this person allowed circumstances, expectations, obligations, and outside opinions to dictate too many of their choices. They were always considering what everyone else would think, always calculating consequences, always trying to maintain a version of themselves that made sense to the world around them. But what happens when that version of yourself stops feeling authentic? What happens when you wake up one day and realize you've been building a life that looks successful but doesn't feel complete? That's the question sitting heavily around this person. And Virgo, every time they ask themselves that question, they somehow end up thinking about you. Because when they think about you, they don't feel pressure. They don't feel performance. They don't feel like they need to become someone else. They feel seen, and that's rare. Much rarer than people realize. What's coming through is that Virgo became a place of emotional safety for this person, long before they fully understood it themselves. You weren't trying to impress them. You weren't trying to manipulate them. You weren't trying to become whoever they wanted you to be. You simply showed up as yourself, and the more this person reflects on that, the more valuable it becomes. Okay, the Ace of Pentacles appears, and I immediately feel somebody thinking long-term. This isn't daydreaming. This isn't fantasy. This isn't someone wondering what could happen for a few weeks and then moving on. No, this feels grounded, practical, real. They're starting to imagine what life would actually look like if they stopped running from this connection and started investing in it. I keep hearing the phrase, could this actually work? And for the first time, they're asking that question from a place of hope rather than fear. Because before, every possibility seemed to begin with obstacles. Now they're beginning to notice possibilities. Before, they focused on everything that could go wrong. Now they're wondering about everything that could go right. And that's a huge shift, a very significant shift. You know what's interesting? I don't think Virgo changed who they were to make this happen. I think this person changed. I think life changed them. Experience changed them. Time changed them. And suddenly the things they once prioritized above all else don't hold the same power anymore. Achievements are still important. Stability is still important. Success is still important. But they're realizing that none of those things mean very much if you have nobody meaningful to share them with. The sun enters the reading and everything brightens. Not in an unrealistic way, not in a fairy tale way. It feels like relief. Like someone finally stepping out of a long season of confusion. I keep seeing this image of a prisoner carrying a heavy backpack for years and only realizing how heavy it was once they set it down. That's what this feels like. Relief, freedom, clarity. And strangely enough, Virgo seems connected to that feeling. Not because you solved all their problems. Not because you rescued them. Because your presence reminded them what honesty feels like. Your presence reminded them what authenticity feels like. And I think they've been craving that more than they realized. The Ace of Cups appears, and I have to smile a little. Because all of the walls, all of the calculations, all of the overthinking, none of it seems nearly as important anymore. What feels important is connection. Real connection. The kind that allows two people to be imperfect. The kind that doesn't require endless masks. The kind that grows stronger through honesty rather than avoidance. And I keep feeling this overwhelming desire from this person to start fresh. Not erase the past. Not pretend mistakes never happened. But build something new using everything they've learned. Something healthier. Something stronger. Something more honest. And Virgo, for many of you, I think they're beginning to understand that what they've been searching for wasn't somewhere else. It wasn't another opportunity. It wasn't another achievement. It wasn't another version of life. It was the feeling they experienced when they were able to be completely themselves. Around you. The Two of Cups closes in around the reading so beautifully that it almost feels inevitable. Not inevitable in the sense that life comes with guarantees, but inevitable in the sense that two people can only ignore a meaningful connection for so long before it asks to be acknowledged. And that's exactly what I'm seeing. A connection asking to be acknowledged. A heart asking to be heard. A person who spent so much time choosing fear that they're finally beginning to understand what it feels like to choose love instead. What's coming through is simple. They want something real. They want something steady. They want something they can build. And for perhaps the first time in a very long time, they're allowing themselves to believe that what they're looking for may have been standing in front of them all along. Because Virgo, the energy surrounding this person no longer feels like someone preparing to walk away. It feels like someone preparing to step forward. Virgo, I keep feeling that this story isn't finished yet. There are still words that want to be spoken. There are still truths waiting to be acknowledged. And for some of you, this may simply be the beginning of a much bigger chapter. As always, take only what resonates and leave the rest behind. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your beautiful energy, and thank you for allowing me to connect with you through these messages. I truly appreciate every single one of you. Until next time, keep listening to your heart, keep trusting your journey, and keep choosing what feels genuine to you. I'm sending you so much love. Take care, Virgo, and I'll see you in the next one.